Okay, it's 11 o'clock on the West Coast and 2 o'clock on the East Coast, so I'll go ahead and get started here with just a little bit of an introduction. This is the ASFPM Insurance Committee call. My name is Becca Fricky, and I'm going to be your moderator. And before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items, specifically about the Skype features. If you're new to Skype, you'll see in the very top left-hand corner, there's a button that says Participants. You can click on that and see a list of all of the people that are in the meeting, at least all of the connections in the meeting. At the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a speech cloud, which will open up the IM feature, which allows you to send messages, text messages that can be moderated questions or comments that you'd like to make to the group. I just want to call your attention to the fact that this meeting is being recorded so that we have a record of the conversations today. And just as a matter of practice, just to keep the background noise down to a minimum, we have the audience muted, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to necessarily hear from you. If you are connected using Skype, using the participants feature or the buttons at the very bottom of your screen, there's a series of blue and red buttons. You can unmute your microphone if you're connected using a headset, or if you've only dialed in today and you're using a telephone, you can unmute your microphone by pressing *6 on your phone. But as I said, as a general rule, I have the audience muted to reduce the amount of distractions and background noise that may happen when people breathe into the phone or talk to somebody else in the room or accidentally put us on hold. So it's not meant to keep you quiet. It's just meant to make the meeting go a little bit more smoothly. But *6 will unmute your microphone, and likewise, it'll toggle it back to the muted stage. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Bender. Just know that I'm here if you need any technical assistance throughout the meeting.
Great. Thanks so much, Becca. And again, thank you, Becca, and Atkins for offering up the use of the Skype service here, and allows us to put stuff up on the screen when we need it and record it, because between Steve and I, my co-chair, taking notes and talking at the same time is tough. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. For those who are on Skype, you'll see the agenda up on front, but I'll go through it quickly for those who aren't. Let me first check, though. My co-chair was going to be calling in from the wilds of Kansas somewhere. Steve, were you able to make it? If you can type in, or *6 if you're on your phone, let me know. Well, maybe he hasn't made it yet. But so we do have a lot to cover. We expanded this, John Gerber and I did. For those who weren't aware, John is on a year of not active, but work with the National Guard, taking time off to work with them on a special project, and he will be back at the end of the calendar year here. So Steve Samuelson has agreed, the NFIP state coordinator, to agree to step in and kind of represent the heartland of America there with Kansas. So thank you, Steve, for filling that spot temporarily. Today, we'll be going over an updated elevation certificate. Just came out 2 weeks ago. Then not a lot on the ICC front, but if Tim Troutman is on, we'll get him to give us an update. I'll go through an update on some of the recent meetings I've attended on behalf of ASFPM. Not a lot of changes going on for the NFIP manual, but I'll highlight those. Chad will get on the line, hopefully, here to give us an update on what's happening on the Hill related to the insurance programs. Steve Samuelson has brought up some needs and concerns around training, and it's also up on the Advocates report that just came out of the need for additional agent training. So we'll reach out to the group and ask for comment via Skype or something here on improvements. The Community Information System that many of you are familiar with, CIS, it looks like it's going to be going through some modernization. So I asked Seal to be on the phone. In fact, Strauss will take 3 of the topics in a row. Now there's discussion about model back Zone A, and hey, can we even use them for rating as Zone AE instead of the unnumbered Zone A? Seal represented ASFPM on California task force around agricultural structures. So I've asked her to give us an update, and that leads into the ASFPM Insurance Committee activity at the conference this year, which will include not only our annual committee meeting, but also an early bird session um, on ag structures. It's picked up even on the Hill. It was mentioned in Roy Wright's remarks, testimony to the House last week, and he's speaking right now, I think, or maybe he's already has, to the Senate. Chad will be speaking later this week, actually, up on the Hill, speaking of which. And then open it up if there's time, new business. So a lot to cover, and so let me jump right into it first and just give an update. Those who aren't familiar, it's now up on the website. FEMA did respond. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. We've submitted about 10 to 12 different comments to enhance and correct the elevation certificate from the final version that they issued. The biggest issue was that it was rounding. It was only allowing one decimal place to be recorded in the area of the C2A through H. And so if you put like 15.06, it put 15.6. So the good news is that has been corrected. However, it forces it to register as 2 decimal places. And for those who are online and on Skype can see the screen that they identified, they fixed several areas. And in fact, FFMA, the Florida Floodplain Management Association, just put out a newsletter, which I've copied parts of and put here. And thank you, Del Schwalz, for the input. That in that newsletter, Dell and FFMA are recommending to surveyors that use this that if they're not measuring it to 2 decimal places, it could imply that you actually did because you put those 2 there. So 15.2 may be the elevation you measured it, but it's going to show as 15.20. So there was some concern that you're certifying that as a surveyor engineer, that you actually did measure it to those 2 decimal places, but in fact you didn't. So just an FYI there. Other things they did fix, the A889 fields now allows you to put not applicable NA when there's no openings or enclosures, as well as putting, of course, a numeric value. The drop-down calendar was removed out of B6 and B7. The Cobra OPA boxes can be unchecked. If you accidentally check them and realize, oops, I didn't mean to, you couldn't uncheck it. And also photographs. If you didn't like the photographs, there's a button now that allows you to clear out those photos. So lots of good changes. They didn't take them all. And at a meeting, which I'll talk about, ASFPM emphasized again to FEMA to please get it out there to be test driven before you issue the final one. I mean, that's why you've got groups like FIPNIC and IBHS that'll talk about ASFPM and others. So if you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and type them into the chat or *6 to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to move to the next topic, which is ICC update. And I don't know if, Tim, if you were able to get on or not. *6, Tim, if you are. Not hearing him. Basically, I believe there's has not been a lot of movement on that front. So I don't know as if there is much more to report on that, except I will tell you on the advocates report again, it did pop up as another issue that they need to have basically some good outreach material to make it easier to understand the ICC claim process. They're recommending they look at increase the limit of coverage available higher than that 30,000. So FEMA is looking at responding to the advocate's report on that. But other than that, I don't know if, Tim, if you had much more to report. Let me move on then and talk about FIPNIC and IBHS. For those who aren't familiar, FEMA has been holding these meetings with these two organizations. FIPNIC is the Flood Insurance Producers National Council, or Committee, sorry. That represents the insurance agent associations. There's basically 3 that make that up. And then the Institute of Business Home Safety, IBHS, has a flood committee. These are basically the write your own companies. And FEMA uses both of these groups as feedback mechanisms to changes that they're going to be making and proposed changes. And we just held those meetings a couple weeks ago. One of the most resounding comments that I heard through this was, FEMA, please reach out to these committees again to test drive and share ideas before rolling out some of the changes that are there, whether it's the Section 28 letters, whether it's, like I mentioned, the elevation certificates, or changes in other programs. I think FEMA is listening, as I'll mention in a second, so hopefully they'll be more participatory. Some highlights out of that meeting. So FIPNIC, ASFPM sits on FIPNIC as a non-voting member, but we get to share our concerns and issues that we hear from an insurance perspective from the floodplain managers. They changed the format this year. So FIPNIC met separately on a Tuesday morning, as did IBHS. So the agents talked about the agent issues, the write-your-own companies talked about the write-your-own issues among themselves, and then the afternoon, both committees got together with FEMA for one big update and discussion. Things that came out of that last year, even though we didn't have a huge major hurricane of any sorts, was the 3rd largest year in claims. $4 billion were paid out. Unfortunately, they went through the reserve and had to borrow money, so they're now $24.6 billion in debt. But they closed claims much more quickly. They got advance payments out there much more quickly. They improved the proof of loss process, and consequently have a very high percentage of the claims closed compared to a couple years ago with what was going on with Sandy. So a lot of great improvements in the claim processing handle, and hence the customer experience was there. They talked about the write-your-own arrangement. Again, the write-your-own are the insurance companies. The arrangement is basically the contract they have with FEMA. It's come under scrutiny by the Hill, by Congress, by GAO, and so FEMA is looking at ways to put in measurements so they can more accurately measure the performance of the write-your-own, but this will take several years to actually make happen. They also raised what they view as important things around the reform issues. We'll have Chad on here in a moment. They want a stable program. It means it needs to be on time and a multi-year reauthorization. They really want to see more people covered with flood insurance, and it's whether it's private or the federal program. From North Carolina floods, they quoted that 70% were in the high-risk areas that had claims, yet 5% only had flood insurance, and that's pretty darn low. Roy has come up with this thing called the moonshot, and this is a goal, just like with President Kennedy. He wanted to land a person on the moon. His moonshot is that he wants to double the number of people protected with flood insurance by 2023. So you're at about 5.1 million policies. That means you're going to be looking for over 10 million policies in 6 short years. The challenge you have is they want to somehow include private policies, but they haven't figured out how to tracked those yet. They're focusing on customer-centric changes to the program, so it's more flexible. They want to make much more flexible. And finally, they want a sound financial program. Now they've gotten reinsurance out there, and they're trying to get the rates to be more full risk rated actuarial soundness. They bought reinsurance, basically bought $1 billion worth of reinsurance, which triggers at the $4 billion level. And they talked about the legacy system. As we all know, it's very antiquated. We'll talk about the CIS in a minute with SEAL. They are taking their legacy system, making a duplicate in Kansas. And so hopefully that will go very smoothly for us this spring. And then they've been given the okay to update the program called Phoenix. So we'll be looking to replace that legacy system in the next couple of years. One thing they did...
Bruce, this is Becca. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think that star 6 isn't working, so I'm going to do something, and it might make a lot of noise. So everybody don't talk while I unmute the entire audience, or unmute, or I don't know how this is going to go, but apparently Tim is on the line, and I need to unmute everybody so that he can be heard. So here goes. Tim, can you hear us now? And can you try star 6 to unmute? Well, I tried.
Hey, Bruce, this is Tim. Can you hear me?
Hey, Tim.
Hey. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the call. I've been on since before the beginning, but the star 6 wasn't initially working.
Well, let me stop. It's probably a good break. They're probably tired of hearing my voice. So you want to try to give us, as you probably heard me say, I don't know how much of an update there is in ICC, but since it's been a topic each time, I thought we'd include it here as well.
Yeah, there. As far as I know, there hasn't been a whole lot that's happened in the last, say, month and a half or two, other than some of the commitments, or I'd imagine there's follow-up on the FEMA side and in different places regarding some of the meetings that occurred in the fall, and of course the advocate's office. One thing I'll just mention that I found out about just in the last few days is that there's also a study being done by the group called Resources for the Future. They're at rff.org, and they're an organization that has done a lot of study work for FEMA in the past. They did an affordability study and a few other things, and apparently they've been tasked with some NFIB reform type information, and a fairly significant component of what they're doing are some ICC evaluations and recommendations, and they're trying to speed that up and get that done, I think, in the next few months because of the reform legislation that is obviously scheduled for the fall. So I talked with them actually this morning. They're interviewing some communities that have had experience with ICC and have ideas related to ICC, and they have data from FEMA regarding claims that they're analyzing, and they're going to kind of put together a more scientific-based piece on how to improve ICC through reform ideas. So I don't have anything in writing from them, but they're Larry Larson with ASFPM gave them some names of some folks that they know have used ICC. They'd actually really like to talk to a few homeowners who have recently used ICC to get their perspective on, were you aware you had it? What were the challenges of using it? Those kind of things from a, an end product standpoint as well. I talked to them at length about my experience and my thoughts with it, and ASFPM's general experience and thoughts with it, but I really didn't have any homeowners here in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area have used it in the last, say, 3 or 4 years. So if anyone knows of a citizen that would be willing to talk with them about their experience, maybe shoot Bruce that information and we can pass it along. And that's really all that I had.
That's awesome update. Thank you. I'm glad to hear they've got a group that's actively working on that area instead of just the quarterly calls that we would be holding with them. Thanks, Tim.
Do I star 6 to mute myself again? Is that right?
Give it a try.
Okay.
If not, maybe just put yourself on mute.
Bruce, real quick, this is Steve Samuel.
Hey.
I've been on the whole time, but I couldn't get unmuted till now. So now I'll mute myself again and listen.
All right. Well, let me know if you got other things to add as I trail along here. So please jump in. An interesting thing to finish up the FITMIC IBHS meeting. Interesting thing that did pop up is that they often I hear from you all, and Steve does, and John Gerber and others, is that the agents out there just are giving and providing conflicting, confusing information around insurance and rating, et cetera. And it is a complicated program. And I carry those messages over to FITMIC and IBHS. But what they have been seeing are substantially damaged letters being issued by communities telling them that hey, they'd be eligible for ICC, but in fact, the building is at or above BFE, so they're not. So it causes some angst with the policyholder and phone calls reaching out to the agents. And this has actually bubbled up to the point where now the companies and are receiving these phone calls, and it was something that was actually discussed at the meeting. So I'm going to be sitting down with one of the insurance companies that did talk about it, as well as somebody from FEMA, Donald Waters, to find out more. But that was a new turn I hadn't heard. Finally, the other thing I'll mention, because I've gotten several emails about this, and that is FloodSmart. They had somebody from the new contractor called Hassett Willis. The FloodSmart contract ended, or I should say campaign. The NFIP marketing campaign ended September 30th of last year. And FEMA has taken a direction, slightly different direction, with a customer communications contract, and they're calling it C3. You know, we have to have acronyms. So with C3, they are looking at how they might more pinpoint and focus and what can drive customers with as I say, more pinpoint and focused marketing effort. With that, they will be evaluating the assets that FloodSmart had, including the websites. So with that said, Chad Berginis has kindly offered FEMA the ability to survey members to say, hey, what do you like about FloodSmart? What do you like about floodsmart.gov? floodsmart.gov/partners. Some of you even use the agents.floodsmart.gov and other resources, because this is the time to help shape what's going to stay and what's not. So be looking for a survey coming from ASFPM of not only what you like, but what enhancements, what's not out there that would be useful. So be looking for that. They did have an industry day the next day, which is slightly different than in the past. This time it was basically breakout sessions with the agent groups and WIOs mixed together, focusing on different topics, but basically how can we improve the claims process and the claims manual, because it is outdated. So this goes back to that FEMA's trying to get input now proactively. And then also in the afternoon, they focused on, all right, we're under pressure. We need to measure your performance as your own company. What should those measurements be? What should we use? So got some good, frank input from the group. So if you've got any questions about it, you can put something in the chat, but that's a quick update on those two meetings, very informative. Around key changes in 2017, April's right around the corner. Renewals are already going out. And good news, the average rate increase is only 6.3%. Now, I put on here for the slides that actually it ranges anywhere from the 25%, which they are mandated by Congress for the pre-firm subsidized policies, but down to zero, no change, and 1% change for like AOH and AEA numbered zones. So really pulling back the reins on those rate increases. Pre-firm primary residences, well, they're required to at least do 5%, so they are doing the 5%. This fall, really the main change that's coming up is the FIA surcharge. It will be refundable. That's something the advocates report asked to have, and so they're going to be implementing it then. And finally, one other thing is the reinsurance. FEMA bought, as I mentioned, reinsurance at the beginning of January 1st. They piloted it late last year, got the kinks out of it, and then purchased it at the beginning of the year for a year. So next up, if there's not any questions or comments, again, put them in their chat function or *6 and unmute yourself. I'm going to pass the baton over to Chad, or the microphone. Chad, are you on? Not seeing his
Bruce,
name.
can you hear me now?
There you are. Yep, thanks.
Okay. And let's see, this topic, I'm sorry, I'm working on testimony right now. NFIP reform?
Yes, speaking of testimony, yes. And I know, thank you for taking time out, because you now suddenly are talking, what, on Thursday?
Yes, yeah. So good afternoon, everybody, or I think morning maybe for a few of you at least over in the Western time zone. I want to give you a little bit of an update in terms of NFIP reform, and I guess as up to the minute accounting of that as possible. Probably maybe the most exciting thing is that ASFPM did get invited to testify in front of House Financial Services Committee this coming Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. I imagine that they'll do as they typically do with hearings now. They'll live stream that. And so right now I am literally in the middle of writing some of the testimony that we'll be providing. And that testimony will then, I think, highlight a lot of the areas where we have concerns and issues, as well as making some recommendations on NFIP reform. So I think, as many of you know, the program does expire at the end of September of this year. And I was just talking to a colleague literally half an hour ago who asked me, what are the chances that the program is going to get, actually reauthorized for any period of time, or is Congress going to do what it typically does and wait till a crisis happens and get some sort of short-term reauthorization, for a couple months or something like that. Because if history was a guide, then we do the latter. We get in that crisis mode. The program might expire for a day or a couple days, and then it would get short-term extensions. But I told him I actually think the dynamic has changed pretty significantly over the last 2 or 3 weeks. What we're hearing now is that the congressional committees that are dealing with this in the House and Senate, this is now their top priority item. There were other priorities that the incoming administration had set for committees like the Senate Banking Committee
However, and this is my speculation now, it seems like those priorities are maybe the realization it's taking too long. It may be very difficult to do anything bipartisan that way. So they see maybe as an easy win NFIP reauthorization. So I now am tending to think that that these early discussions we better be taken pretty seriously, because that I think there's a reasonable likelihood of getting a pretty substantial reform bill. So in terms of kind of the political lay of the land, you're going to have, typically on how these things work, usually the House of Representatives will come up with its bill, the Senate will come up with its bill, they pass amendments and things, and then they end up negotiating a final bill. We can expect this time around that the House bill will have a healthy dose of moving the program more towards privatization. In the Senate, not exactly sure where things are going to land. We know that the private flood insurance bill that passed the House last year is going to be the basis for the House bill. We understand it's also going to be reintroduced into the Senate. And more than likely, because many of you have done such a wonderful job of sending notices our way just to make sure that we're aware at the executive office, that members are now introducing their little standalone bills on NFIP reform. You're going to see a lot of this over the next few months, because members of Congress will submit a bill dealing with a very narrow issue in the hopes that the main bill will kind of suck it up, and that'll be part of the bigger reform package. So we're monitoring all of this very carefully, as well as working with all of the committees, staffers, as well as the individual members, and getting them kind of educated on the concerns of floodplain managers and our issues, because again, what seems to be at least driving so much of the discussion right now is this whole issue is the insurance piece of this, and more specifically this privatization element, without a lot of appreciation for the NFIP as a much broader, comprehensive flood risk management program. That's what our testimony will be identifying, and then ASFPM has also developed a list of 6 kind of principles for reauthorization, as well as a 2-pager on some priorities. But our basic focus areas are, supporting and strengthening mapping, supporting and strengthening mitigation, including ICC, making sure that whatever private sector initiatives happen, that it doesn't put the NFIP at a competitive disadvantage, nor does it undo the other pillars of the NFIP, being, floodplain management, mapping, and mitigation. Forgiving and dealing with the debt in the program, and then some other minor, and improved compliance with the mandatory purchase provision. Those are kind of the main areas that we're focusing on. So with that, Bruce, I'll just kind of leave it there. And again, I'm not online, so I don't know if you have a chat box running, if there's anybody with questions or anything, or if you have any questions, be happy to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. And folks, if please do put in the box, or if you can *6 and raise your hand for those, or *6 and ask a question. But Chad, I'll quickly ask you one. One point is, my understanding, and what I think some people forget or miss out, is that if the NFIP does shrink, as you pointed out, the growth of the private not to be at the expense of the NFIP, but as it does shrink, then that is less funding for, so help me out here, I believe the mapping program, operations, grants. Is that right? Did I miss any?
Well, yeah. So the shrinking of the policy count in the NFIP is problematic for a couple of reasons. One of the more basic ones, I think, is that Congress is going to probably head in the exact opposite direction they think they are, whereas the program will likely need a permanent subsidy simply to pay claims every year, because if they're not careful, they're going to pull a more concentrated pool of riskier properties. But in terms of the other pillars of the NFIP, 100% of the NFIP's floodplain management capability is paid through the federal policy fee that's assessed for on each NFIP policy sold. 100% of that. So if you can see if you cut the number of policies by a fifth or 2/5, that is some serious impact to floodplain management, and of course that supports some of the state assistance programs as well as technical assistance to the communities. 1/2 of the mapping budget, based on kind of current trends, is supported by the federal policy fee. So again, less policies equals less budget for doing flood mapping. And then NFIP premiums pay for the flood mitigation assistance program. So less policies, less premiums, less FMA. ICC, because it's its own surcharge that's supposed to be somewhat actuarially rated, in kind of a weird way, it's not as affected. But again, you can see that pretty much every pillar of the NFIP could be adversely affected in a financial sense. Just as if increasing private sector involvement means poaching policies from the program versus growing the entire policy count across the country.
Right. Thank you. Oh, and I heard today in another conversation similar to you, just for this call, that things are moving briskly now, that there might even be something by the end of the month coming out of the House. Any feel for that?
I'm sorry, that what's coming out of the House?
That a bill or a draft might be coming out of the House by the end of the month? Could that move that quickly?
I think it's definitely possible. And I think from the planning purposes of the Insurance Committee, you might even have a draft bill of both the House and Senate by the time the ASFPM conference rolls around.
Perfect. Always good stuff to talk about. Well, thank you, Chad. Again, if you've got questions, put them in the chat box, or we'll take a pause in a little bit again for anybody to ask questions up to date. The next section, I had wanted to have to see if the H2O Partners, who provides the NFIP training for FEMA to adjusters and agents and others, to give an update, but mea culpa, I reached out to him a little bit too late. So, but Steve, I know you had an update on some of things that are happening in your area. So I wanted to maybe pass it over to you if you could *6 if you're still available, and also open it up to the group to say, okay, what are things, if we're going to turn to FEMA as a committee regarding training, what do we need to see more of, less of, enhancements of? But let me stop there and say, Steve, if you can get on.
I'm on.
Great.
Bruce, Sonia Wood works for H2O Partners, lives here in Kansas. I was speaking to her at a FEMA meeting. She told us that H2O Partners has been authorized this year to do 75 live in-person trainings spread out across the United States. My region, Region 7, is only going to get one training for all 4 states. It'll be in Kansas City, Missouri on April the 20th. So that means there will be opportunity for some of the other people in other regions listening to this to get maybe 2 or 3 trainings in their region. And I hope they can take advantage of it and help advertise those and get with their agents, because I have plenty of trouble with agents writing policies incorrectly and people paying too much for insurance. So training is good. We have a insurance specialist at FEMA now. That position was empty for a long time, and I mean here at our local region, not nationally. And so the new guy actually just did an insurance training with me last Tuesday at the Kansas Association of Insurance Agents in their office, which was a live stream-fed deal. So there was people sitting in the classroom with us and then other people watching online from their office, and they're going to record that and rebroadcast it And then he also went up to Nebraska, worked with Mitch Payne, the guy up in Nebraska, and they did a insurance agents road trip. They did 3 trainings, live trainings for insurance agents in 3 different cities in 3 days. But insurance agent training is a concern of all of the NFIP coordinators in my area, and I bet it's a concern in other places too. And that's about it.
Great. Thanks, Steve, for the update. I know we've got other people from, I should say people from other regions. Anybody else want to comment about the training, pro, con, enhancements, things they'd like to see?
This is Roger Lindsay in Nashville.
Hey, Roger.
Hey, one of the things, we have more and more interaction with insurance agents here in the Nashville area. Some of them appear to be dismally trained. But the reality is we don't really have any sense of what kind of training they're getting and how we can function, say, in our state association in a manner that would assist a local insurance organization with training that really is meaningful relative to the kinds of things that we provide input to. That we're the repository of the elevation certificates. We're the floodplain administrators. We provide feedback. When the agents are truly in a quandary, they do finally call us, but quite a few apparently don't, and a number of people. I know that there are scores of people that are paying a whole lot more for insurance than what the properly rated property would warrant.
Thanks, Roger. And we do hear issues, and the advocate's office does as well, of misratings, and hence why they brought up the education issue with them. Have you tried reaching out to the state associations and offering to do your own training to them, perhaps?
We've not reached out to the state groups, no, and that's probably something that needs to be part of our initiatives for this year.
Bruce, can you hear me? This is Catherine Howington with Bankers Insurance.
Hello, Catherine.
What we're doing, oh, you can hear me? So what I've been doing is going through the states, because, I travel across the United States. So I've been going after map changes, and what I do is I contact the local floodplain manager, asking them if they'll host a flood class, because I'm doing a map change, flood class, and grandfathering to agents, and it's open to the public, and it's also open for any CFM. So wherever there's a map change going, I ask that community to host the class, because one, they'll get CRS credit. Plus, I give them the sign-in, sign-out sheet, and everyone can attend. So you have your insurance agents, you have your CFMs, so that everyone's working together and understanding, what's going on with the map changes or the grandfathering and, whatnot. So that's what we're doing as a write-your-own carrier.
So, Catherine, that's great. How do you, when you say you reach out to local community, do you have them help set up a meeting, or you do give them an FYI that you're going to be in the area doing this, or do they present
what I do is,
with you?
Well, Des in Sarasota actually hosted my flood class, and all the agents came out, and then Sandy from Manatee, I think her name's Sandy from Manatee, they came out and spoke to my agents about the recent map. Well, Des spoke about the recent map changes that went in for Sarasota County. And then Sandy was talking about the coastal map changes going on in Florida, which was really great because they gave out their contact information to the agents. The agents had questions. They had questions, and that way everyone's working together. So what I do, for example, the building officials of St. Lucia, Florida, had asked me to come to speak at one of their meetings. So I went out there to speak, showing them what the difference is from rating from your A zone to your V zone, and if you have enclosures, or what the rate could be if you're at a -1 or a +1, things like that. So they were really excited about that. So what I started doing, for example, I'll be in South Carolina at the end of the month. So I've reached out to Myrtle Beach, asking them if they would host a class at one of their, whether it's in the town hall or the library or wherever it's at. Same thing for Charleston and Hilton Head, and all three have said yes. So they're going to make it public. The public's open to come. It's a 2-hour class, and it's on map changes and grandfathering. So I have the agents there, CFMs, building officials, and whatnot, that attend. And that's what I'm doing throughout the year, is chasing the map changes and going to those communities to speak. And also, they get CRS credit.
That's great to hear. And Roger, it sounds like there are agents and companies out there that might just be open, like Catherine, to partner with you. So you might want to look at that. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing that. That's a great positive story there. And keep
You're welcome.
Any other comments about training?
Bruce, this is Dale Schwalls in Florida. We've been working with Catherine as well, trying to get our Florida Association approved for CEUs for insurance agents in order to get them some of our classes. But another thing we're doing here is we're trying to educate our communities that anytime they have an insurance company or a homeowner reach out to them with an incorrectly written policy, that they then reach out to us as the state association or the Florida Division of Emergency Management to let us know who that insurance company is, and then we are in turn reaching out to that insurance company and educating them with the idea that if we educate the one office in Orlando, then they will in turn educate their colleagues. And so it's a very slow grassroots process of when you come up with an issue, don't just throw it away, but send it to us so that we can start slowly chipping away at it.
Right. Like you said, slow, but it can only help. Any other comments there about improvements or good stories or things you'd like to see?
Scott in Key West.
Or did we just lose
Scott in Key West? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
Scott,
go
we can
ahead,
hear you.
Scott.
Okay. Yeah, one of the issues that seems to be present mostly outside the state of Florida, is lack of enforcement for the mandatory coverage. And when I asked the FEMA officials, why is that the case, they say it's not within their jurisdiction, it's within the federal and state banking officials or regulators to oversee that. Is there any way to get some emphasis or training for the banking regulators so they know to look at this?
That's an interesting comment from the aspect is when you talk with the lenders, and in fact I've done several panels and we'll be doing another one in a couple weeks, they will adamantly tell you compliance is not an issue as to the extent that people claim, even though FEMA brought up in our FITMIC IBHS meeting that 5% of the policies in the special flood hazard area had coverage, which was quite shocking to hear. So I think the analysis that I've seen, a RAND study, an internal one done by J. Walter Thompson, they presented at FITMIC IBHS, shows it's 50% or less. But I haven't seen, what the lenders will say is they haven't seen, though, the big news. It's been pointed out to me that if there really was a compliance issue, you'd be reading it about a lot in the paper and the news about the banks and around that, and that story's just not there. So I hear both sides of the story, but anecdotally, Scott, when we have these large events, we seem to see these properties in high-risk areas that do have loans not being covered. Now, why they aren't, are they the Wells Fargos of the world? Not to pick on them, but just a large bank, or are they private lenders or small lenders that don't fall under the auspices of federal regulation? I don't know. It's a good point. But then the bottom line is the training does need to be there. I think H2O has in the past provided it. I don't think it's in their contract now, but I don't want to speak for them. but I know from what I've heard in the past, when they have done them, they get pretty good turnout. And I think training on that is important, just as like it is for the agents. Thanks, Scott. All right, well, let me move on in the sake of time. Again, this will be one of the things we'll bring up at the conference this May, and what can we do to help guide the education of, as you pointed out, Scott, lenders as well as agents. So it makes our job out in the field as floodplain managers that much easier. The next three topics, Seal, I'm going to pass these over to you. FEMA is looking to modernize the community information system, and we had a bunch of good dialogue back and forth. So, Seal, I thought I'd let you lead that and see what comments we get from the field about what they'd like to see enhanced on the CIS. The next would be modeled back Zone A is picking up a lot of interest, and could we use that for rating Zone AE instead of rating it as Zone AE instead of having to rate it as a number. And finally, if you could give an update just on your meeting with the California Task Force and Ag Structures.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me all right.
Hear you great.
Great. See, on the community information systems, there's actually two different systems. So there's also the BureauNet that the state folks and FEMA folks have access. The state folks have a different access than the FEMA folks. And so a lot of the discussion was what we can see in BureauNet at the state level. Right now, I understand only 2 people per state can get access to that. And that basically gives us access to seeing a lot of the insurance information, and they have a standard report that we can do, but it doesn't include basic information in the standard report like what zone it is, what the BFEs, lowest adjacent grade, if they're grandfathered or not, minus rated, all kinds of basic information that we have to go to another part of the system and dig down in a very time-intensive way to get to the information. So, part of the discussion is how can we make that information more user-friendly, usable for the state folks that do have access to that. And the CIS, the Community Information Systems, is another one of these old systems that is apparently also being updated at the same time. And I found out that that was even being discussed from a call. They didn't ask us our opinion in our region, but other regions were asked for input on the CIS, and there were several good things that were brought up. And this is, again, something that the states and FEMA staff update all the information on CAVs, community assistant visits, and CACs, contacts. We update when communities update their ordinances, and that's where we go to say if a community has properly adopted their ordinance. So during the map update process, we have to do that so that FEMA can approve the communities before they get to the map effective date. And if the state and FEMA hasn't shown that the ordinance was adopted properly, then the community gets automatically suspended if they haven't adopted those maps in time. So there's a lot of things that these systems are used for, and they are clunky, archaic systems. One of the big complaints on the community information systems that a couple different people brought up was that they'll be entering all kinds of information into the system, go to take a phone call, or walk away from their desk and come back, and the system's timed out and they've lost all the information they entered. So there's a lot of just those kinds of things that have been concerns in getting the systems updated. Now, what I did have a chance to do was follow up with June, And one of the underwriters a week ago Friday, that was more talking about BureauNet. But and Bruce mentioned this, that they're in the process of basically backing up these systems and getting a backup for them, and that was supposed to be completed in the next few months. They did say that they are going to the next stages for this Phoenix system, that they just got permission to move forward into the second phase, and they've been gathering data. They did say that Josh Smith is the branch chief who's working with Phoenix, and I'm going to be trying to follow up with Josh more directly to see how we can get involved in having input on what's going to be in the updated system. But June was interested in talking about a way to get input from the states on what should be in the new systems. He was going to be talking with Rachel Sears, though, first, and so I still need to follow up and see if they've talked to each other and we can be getting a little bit more coordinated on how they will get input from the states on what needs to be in that system and how we can make it more efficient. There's all kinds of issues in addition to, I mentioned, just being able to access the information in a more efficient manner. Another thing that's come up is how information can be shared with the communities, and I'm finding that there's not total consistency among the FEMA regions on how and what we can be sharing with the communities. And some of the information, like on the repetitive losses, severe repetitive losses, we're routinely sharing with communities because it's part of their updating their all hazard plans. So that's in addition to just making the system more efficient and more usable for everybody. There does need to be some clarification on what information can be and should be shared with local officials, because there's all this information that we know local officials would like to be able to use and could be more efficient about how they're doing their jobs too. So, and I don't know if anybody wants to jump in with any other comments on that before I go on to the other topics.
While there's a pause, and please jump in, people. We'd like to hear pluses and minuses of the CIS and the BureauNet that you're dealing with. Did June give any indication when they might want to reach out, or when we might need to tag back with Rachel or June to try to give feedback so they don't create something in a vacuum?
Well, it did sound like we could potentially be trying to set something up at the conference, because
Okay.
the timing sounded like it was going fairly quickly. So I said, well, gee, we're going to be at the conference. That's perfect opportunity to try and get some input where we can have people talking face to face with them. So that was my understanding, and I need to get clarification after June and Rachel have talked. So
Okay.
it was a week ago Friday, so I think it's been long enough that I could do some follow up with them.
Okay. Anybody comments?
Okay, well, maybe I'll go on and talk about the model-backed A-zones.
Okay.
But if folks do have comments on BureauNet, CIS, feel free to send me comments if it's not stuff that we've already shared here in some of the more recent emails and conversations. The model-backed A-zone, and the background for this is that in the current ratings that you've got very different rates, especially for the A zones versus the detailed study, the zone AEs. And so the question is, as we're getting some of the better model-backed A zone information, that really shouldn't be treated the same as an approximate or where you're using highest adjacent grade to figure out what the rates are in an A zone. That in some cases our model-backed A zones are actually better than some of the detailed studies that we've got that were done originally in the 70s and 80s. So I did bring it up. I asked that it be on the agenda. We have a approximately quarterly operating partners meeting where we've got folks from the mapping side at FEMA that get together with some representatives from the ASFPM and the Association of Stormwater, I forget their official acronym there. But we had a meeting last Thursday. I asked that it be on the agenda. It was not as good of a discussion as I had hoped it would be in terms of, because I was suggesting that we come up with some guidance on what model-backed A zones were good enough, were detailed enough, because there's kind of a continuum of the levels of study. You've got, well, we don't call them FOAs anymore. They're first-order approximations. I think we call them automated base flood elevations, or model the automated base level elevations, or basic engineering elevations. They keep changing what they're calling these things, but some of them are really quick and dirty, and you definitely wouldn't want to be using for the for insurance or for LOMA decisions. But those that are more detailed, they're putting in the crossing information, and it's been through a review of what kind of hydrology should be used, and been vetted, been through the review process, that those are pretty darn good models, and that people should be getting credit for better rates and be able to rate using that information rather than calling it the A zone rates. So bottom line was that we had discussion about it. It really left, the discussion was kind of left up in the air. And I think I'm going to have to follow up on that, because we didn't have anything conclusive come out of that meeting. And I think we're going to have to push a little bit more to keep going in that direction. And I don't know if anybody's on the call here that was at that operating partners meeting last Thursday, who wants to comment on my impression of what happened in the meeting. I'm not hearing anyone coming on, but that's going to continue to be something that we're going to have to push for.
Yeah, I'll just add that this came up actually separately to me, unrelated to what you guys were working on. Of course, then I heard what you all were working on, and so I had reached out to the insurance underwriting over there at FEMA, or FIMA, and what they're looking for to use that is how do we identify that scenario? How does the agent know to get that data and where to get that data to use for, if you were going to say, hey, I'll use that data for Zone 8, A as an AE. So that's something you might want to keep in the discussion, as well as what are the underwriters going to be looking to get to make sure it can be used.
Yeah, and that's a good point, is, how do they know when that is there? One of the things that Rick from FEMA brought up was, do we want to be having a national A-zone, model-based A-zone viewer, similar to what we've got with the National Flood Hazard Layer viewer, and there was a little discussion back and forth on that, but which so many of the states now have our own systems, but that making it so that the insurance agents know that it's accepted, maybe something like that would be needed. So we're still very much in the trying to figure it out stage here. But at least I think we've made it so that they're aware it's an issue, whereas 2 months ago I had no idea that was even an issue. Okay, and I guess moving ahead to egg structures, we really don't have, I don't have anything more in terms of details on that other than we've been working on the early bird session to talk about the egg structures. And I think, was that part of what you were talking about there, Bruce, with the national conference?
Yeah, and I didn't know if you wanted to just say what your role was on the California task force representing ASFPM.
Yeah. It was just that I was the ASFPM contact. There were some other folks involved with ASFPM who were involved on the task force, but I was funneling the comments from ASFPM forward, and I did go to the FMA conference and participated in a panel talking about the egg structure issues, and so that was a good opportunity to talk about a lot of the issues there, and talked about some of the issues more directly with the task force members there when at that conference in Sacramento. But we did give comments, and we do still need to actually the technical memo that was done as the final step in that process for that task force, that the egg structure task force. There were a few things that ASFPM wanted to clarify further, and we do need to follow up and share that with FEMA, that to clarify some of the things that were in the final technical memorandum from the egg structure task force there. But maybe back to maybe Bruce, you want to talk about the early bird?
Sure.
I think that's kind of the latest.
Yeah. So before I'll mention that. So in the upcoming conference in Kansas, in the heartland of America, there or Kansas City, I should say, we are going to be holding an early bird. The past 2 years, it's been on ICC, and we've had great feedback. Full room this last session. Could have kept going another hour probably or more. And this time we're going to focus on the challenges of ag structures in regulating them and in ensuring them, as well as lender compliance. Speaking of lender compliance earlier. So we're going to have somebody from the West Coast, somebody from the East Coast area, and somebody from the middle to talk about some of the challenges they have, but then really looking to get feedback from the audience. Rachel Sears, who's the floodplain manager branch, or is it division, I guess, heads that up. She will be there. We're hoping to get an insurance person there as well. So it should be a very open and participatory type of workshop. Early in the morning, apologize, but we really want to capture what those issues are. In California, as Seal was alluding to, they have some unique situations. Their floodplains are really, really deep. So what may work in Kansas or Missouri or Illinois or even up in New York may not be applicable or be even come close to working there in California. So this is a thing that is on the radar up in Congress. The GAO wrote a report on it, and FEMA is having a research project on it as we speak. Sorry, was I on mute?
Sorry, Bruce. I was trying to quiet some background noise that was on the call. You are not muted anymore.
Okay, great, thanks. So anyway, so please make sure to, if you're going to be at the conference, to put this down as one of the things you want to definitely attend. Let me stop right there and just say, our people who are on the phone, what are some of the challenges you're seeing or hearing out there around ag structures in the floodplain that we might want to make sure to address or include in the upcoming workshop and stuff? Any comments at this time?
This is Christine Shirley from the state of Oregon. One of the issues that we are dealing with are hoop houses, sometimes very large hoop houses, partly because they're used to grow marijuana. So I would like some guidance about hoop houses to come out for my floodplain managers.
Christine, could you explain more what a hoop house is?
Yeah, it's a metal structure that's in the shape of a Quonset hut, and they're generally covered with plastic. And so they're somewhat temporary, but they're not. And the question is, what kind of floodplain permitting would be required? Are they considered an insurable structure, and so on? They're basically pipes that go in a hoop, and then they're very long and covered with heavy plastic.
Okay. If I could connect with you, this is Seal. If I could connect with you, maybe get a picture or a link to more about that would be helpful.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, because it sounds like it's somewhat like at a nursery. What do they call those? I went blank where it's all glass.
A greenhouse?
Greenhouse. They are greenhouses. They're greenhouses, but they're covered in heavy plastic.
Plastic and stuff. And I don't believe, and Catherine, if you're still on, I don't believe greenhouses are covered by the NFIP. But whether it's whether you have to regulate them or not, I think that'd be an interesting topic to explore.
Yeah, that's the question: is how do you regulate hoop houses? Small ones, they're one thing, but some of these in Oregon now are very large. So
this is Catherine.
I get a lot of questions.
They wouldn't be covered. They have to have 2 solid walls and a roof in order to be covered for flood insurance.
Right, but then there's the floodplain management side. That's the part I'm interested in.
True.
Good point. Thanks.
I have a topic. This is Marilyn, and I'm calling from the state of Maryland. One of our concerns with ag structures is the size limitation. We have I come from farmland country, and a lot of our farmers need large ag structures, and so we're concerned about any limitations on sizes, or some of the limitations on sizes.
From a floodplain management regulation perspective, you're saying, right?
Yes, and the farmers want to be able to build whatever they want to build, to put all of their different pieces of equipment in there, and so any future regulations that come down, if they're I guess the concern would be that there would be size limitations on them.
Had not heard that. Okay, great.
Okay. And as part of the size concern that I know it might vary by region, but at least in our region, small buildings they're allowed to be wet flood proofed if they're up to like 576 square feet, and so the typical pole barns and egg buildings are bigger than that, and it ends up having to go through a variance. Is that where you're getting the size limitations? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Marilyn. Other points, questions, and stuff around ag issues. Steve, I don't know if you're still on, if there's any out in your area. Let's talk about the Midwest.
Yeah, I'm still on, and you already know about my concerns about insurance requirements for ag buildings, and some of my other concerns that I've expressed to Seal in the past. Those hoop houses that Christine was talking about, We get an extra special problem with those in my state because a lot of them are being built with grant funds from the Conservation Service. So farmers get money from the government to build something, and I have to come in as another government agency and say, no, you can't have it there. And on the size limitations in Technical Bulletin 7, it spells out some size limitations roughly the size of a two-car garage for accessory buildings, but I don't think it spells out anything right now on the size of the agriculture buildings that are used purely for agriculture. And this phone's got a lot of feedback on it. I can't hear anymore.
Great, thanks, Steve. Sorry for the feedback. I don't know if you're looking at your computer screen. Sometimes if the computer is on and your phone is on, you get that feedback, so you can hit the mute part on the computer. But I don't know if that's your case there. Any other thoughts or comments from around the U.S. here? 100 plus some people on the phone. Well, if not, again, please send them to Steve and I, because we'll want to make sure, if you're not going to be at ASFPM conference, to get them addressed. As mentioned, even Roy Wright talked about ag structures in his testimony last week to the House Financial Services. So this is an important topic, very visible to FEMA and very important to all of us. I've been on a strong learning curve on this topic about the different issues around them of lender compliance. The lender requires the requires the flood insurance. They have to get the flood insurance, and yet the building is not even worth the amount of the deductible. So, what do we do? How can we address that? Issues where the maps change, it gets substantially damaged, and now they have to raise one of the silos, but it talks to the other through an auger. You can't do that because it just will not work. How do we address those issues? So a lot of unique challenges out there around insurance, and how do they reduce that cost? How do they reduce the risk? Lender compliance, do they need it everywhere, including every tiny little shack that's out there, and barn, and of course regulating the growth in the floodplain. Okay. Well, that leads us, speaking of the insurance committee, ASFPM conference, the insurance committee will be holding its meeting on Monday afternoon. Due to a conflict, the National Flood Conference is having their conference the same week as ASFPM. So I'll be doing double duty. Therefore, I will not be at the insurance committee meeting. Steve will be leading that for us. But we'll look to have, we've invited somebody from FEMA underwriting and FIP underwriting. June Dela Cruz will let us know who that will be. Our typical updates with CRS. We'll see if we can get the AFGIT's office there as well, and then any other updates. Then, as mentioned, Wednesday morning, I'll be there to help Steve with running that workshop on ag structures in the floodplain. So hopefully you all can make it. If not, please get us topics that you'd like addressed, questions answered, and we'll be glad to bring those up. With that, the remaining 10, go ahead. Somebody have a comment?
Bruce, I'd say something before you go, if you would allow it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve. Well, I just want to tell all the people that are coming to the conference, I'm going to give them directions. The Marriott Hotel is the conference hotel. When you leave the Marriott Hotel, if you walk out the front entrance of the hotel where they pull up and drop off people, the hotel guests, the valet parking, look to your right and across the street, you'll see the big conference hall where we're having the conference. Our conference is at the far end of that conference hall. So walk down the street on the outside edge of that conference hall till you've gone about a block and you're next to the municipal auditorium. Then go inside the conference hall, go forward till you come to a corner, turning back to the left, and that's where you'll see the conference. That's where registration for the conference will also be.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And it kind of reminds me of those who were in Michigan last year. You also had to take a walk down the side of the building to get in And I know Steve, as being our host, will make sure that we have wonderful weather the entire week there. Steve, before I jump into new business, I was going to ask you any other points that you want to bring up, or
Sure.
we didn't bring up?
Little bit, another conference tidbit. The Welcome Festival theme this year is a tailgate party. So we're going to serve the kind of food that they serve at tailgate parties in front of the football stadiums before a game. And people are invited to bring their team jerseys. So if you'd like to wear a team jersey, you can certainly do that. And then you guys are going to be part of the decorations, and we don't have to pay for so many decorations that way.
Very clever on that. All right. Well, in the remaining few minutes, what other topics out there that Steve and I haven't added to the agenda would you like to see included? Or something you want to bring up that, hey, I've had this happen, where can I go for information related to insurance and the like? Because I've been doing a lot of talking, and it's kind of your guys' turn. Boy, not even crickets. All right. Well, as Becca pointed out, and again, thank you so much for letting us use this service and for being our moderator there and making sure things moved along smoothly. So thank you. This was recorded. Becca will give us a link to where it will be, and we'll put it up and provide that, so we can have that. So if you missed part of this, you came in late, you want to have your colleagues hear it, it'll be there. I'll also put this PowerPoint up. Wasn't a lot on it. Otherwise, look forward to seeing everybody at the conference at the beginning of May. One last thing, Steve or Seal, any last comments?
No, thank you for listening, and love to see as many of you as possible at the conference.
In the past, we discussed the flood-proofing certificate problems. Is there any progress on that?
I could barely hear you, but what I heard was the flood-proofing. Who was that?
Yeah, Scott in Key West bringing up the flood-proofing certificate problems again.
Right. I remember this was, yes, that was brought up. And Scott, I think that has not gone anywhere. Let me look to find that. Was it you, I think, that sent me an email on it? I'm thinking way back. And wanted to get.
Yeah, was it?
Go ahead.
Was it to insurancecorner@floods.org?
It might have been. Maybe that's how I got it.
Yeah, I can just resend it.
Yeah, if you could. Because we're taking a look at that. There's another committee too that will be taking a look, can participate in that. I think what happened was we got pretty focused on the elevation certificate, and this kind of fell to the wayside. So yes, please do resend that.
Is there a better address to send it to?
No, it comes to me. So just use that one.
Okay, will do.
So Steve and I'll look at it. Because I think I also have now another comment recently on it as well. So thanks for bringing that back up, Scott.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for the time, and we'll see you all in Kansas City. Here we come. And thanks, Becca.
My pleasure, Bruce. Signing off. Bye, everyone.
Bye.